Hello, everybody. We're back and we are here today to talk about AI and automation in project management. Hi, everybody. We are here today with Robert Gordon. Robert is a faculty member of the American Public University System. He's been an educator for over 20 years. Robert has a PhD in management and organizational leadership. He's also the author of 5 books and hundreds of articles, and he has spent an enormous amount of time in his career coaching and training and helping people within the project management community. We're really excited to have Robert here today to talk about AI and automation as it pertains to project management. Robert, thanks so much for your time.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great. It's a great opportunity.
Well, let's just get right into this. That's the way we roll. We like to get right into the questions. So first question for you, we read everywhere, we see this, all over the news. Automation and AI are very disruptive. They are displacing workers all over the place. Back office workers, service sector workers. We hear about the fact that the trucking industry is at risk of being displaced. I even read about lawyers and surgeons being replaced by robots and by AI bots. So that essentially no professions are immune to this AI and automation revolution. What are your thoughts about how AI and automation are going to impact the profession and the practice of project management? Are project managers at risk? And if so, how?
Well, that's a great question. I actually have done some research in a similar vein. I was actually part of a 2-year research project that is actually continuing on AI and the application within education and higher education. So we were studying to see the student perspective and understanding what AI would be introduced at the higher education level, and to see what opportunities there were, as well as to understand if students were willing to accept, let's say, an AI for an instructor, and what the thoughts was in the marketplace. So from that research, we really gathered from student feedback that they weren't quite ready to say, okay, AI is going to replace instructors. So from a standpoint of higher education, professors are not quite at risk. Now, that doesn't mean that later on they won't be. Now, what's interesting with that is there were some studies that we took a look at where they did use AI intelligence, didn't tell the students, kind of a blind method until the end. And the students most of them did not realize they were interacting with AI. But if you think about it, a lot of what in education is going to be information and communication, and you can almost call it data transfer. Now, I'm making it very simple, but a lot of it is gathering information and knowledge, which one would think an AI could communicate and manage. But students, they didn't. That's not what they wanted. It came down to they wanted that human interaction. So relating this back to project management is you're going to see the same thing. I don't think project managers in the short term, meaning 10, 20, 30 years, are at risk. However, they will be moving towards a lot more tools and aids and assistance when it comes to working a project. Recently I was kind of like doing a little bit of research and things on, for example, the project manager, one of the very normal common tasks is to send out reports. Project managers constantly sending out reports, updates, status, this, that. It is now very possible and completely acceptable to make a chat bot that would have all that same data and information and be able to interact with an individual rather than just a report. So the project manager should be kind of expecting that they're going to have much more interactive data and communication with others. And it may be via the support of a chatbot that may be able to help and reach out to others. Because a project manager now has a much larger reach. Already with using social media, project managers can reach out to a lot more people and a lot more individuals. With AI and social media, they can now reach out to even more people and fundamentally keep people updated without necessarily having to generate those reports and do to contact certain stakeholders. Of course, there's still going to be that human interaction that project managers have. They're going to be dealing with their clients indirectly. They're going to have these things, but from a standpoint of interacting with more people and getting more information out there about the project, I see a chatbot being a particularly strong tool that will be used by project managers in the future.
Well, let's explore this. Be more specific here. So chatbots are great. But are there? Can you give us an idea of how broad the tool set is? How many other tools are there that you would consider either AI or automation related that project managers are going to need to use, or are going to need to know about, to learn about, and to actually leverage to do their jobs in order to stay relevant and to sort of essentially merge with the technology? Besides chatbots, what else is out there that we need to know about?
Well, there in a very broad sense, it's going to be anything that's going to help a project manager with decision-making processes. And I can see them interacting with AI when it comes to risk, because you can have a AI repository of a lot of data when it comes to risk information. So it will be able to research and harvest, let's say, information about risk from multiple projects across multiple, disciplines against multiple industries. Because as these AI information is being collected and processed, it's going to be able to help with things such as risk management. You're going to be able to have a larger host of risk tools. You're also going to have a larger host when it comes to building contingencies and any kind of decision-making process, because now you're going to have the opportunity to tap into large databases and large information regarding projects, regarding project management, regarding the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to projects, because the database is not going to be discriminating against what the results were. It's just going to give you the data on it and give recommendations based on the questions that you ask it. I see in the past, a project manager would often go to their files or network in order to get information on project, potentially risks, potentially decisions, potentially regarding contracts. And now I see that in addition to that, they can also reach out to different AI, which will have repositories of data, which is even going to be exponentially larger than their own network.
What about the role of, how important is the role of virtual assistants? Is that something that is being used by project managers right now?
Oh yeah, well, right now, people are using it on their phone. Absolutely, it's existing in the workplace. It's existing in education. That's also going to be a tool. But I see that the virtual assistants, some of them, particularly like the ones that can schedule meetings and ones that can give you, other assistance in certain areas, are useful. I'm not quite so sure that a virtual assistant, such as on your phone, like a Siri, is going to be the go-to tool for project managers in the future. However, having said that, there is talk about these AI tools getting much broader. And if they tap into these larger databases, it would make for a convenient interface in the future.
What do you think about robotic process automation? Is that something that is going to take over some of the functions that a typical project manager is currently responsible for? And how much does a project manager need to know about robotic process automation in order to do their job? Any thoughts about that?
I think they should be understanding it. Obviously, as they're buying products for their, for example, for their project, they will be interacting potentially with robotics within warehouses, potentially AI driven drones, doing pick and pack and doing organization. It's also possible that there'll be AI connected to 3D printers, which could be actually creating materials or custom items. So there is going to be, I see it as a bit of AI, but also a bit of 3D printing and then transportation elements when it comes to be for a project manager. I think that's already kind of happening.
What about this? I mean, you were talking about the risk, about health decision making and researching and harvesting information about risk. A lot of what machine learning and deep learning can do or will be able to do is going to be contingent on having large pools of data, well organized, data that's been migrated. That's a huge effort. It sort of lies at the root of the success of a lot of these initiatives. And it's sort of what, when people talk about digital transformation, getting the data and cleaning the data, make sure you have clean data and it's migrated and organized in a central place is a big part of that. How much of that do project managers, is that going to impact project managers, and what do they need to be aware of when it comes to data cleansing and data migration efforts as a critical success factor for all of this?
I think it's going to have an impact, but I really think that the AI and that data and that information is actually going to come more from the insurance industry, because the insurance industry already has history and data on this all over the place. And so the more that they're able to tap into that and utilize that, the insurance industry is going to use it for determining, premiums. But the project manager can also utilize similar information or access to that information to understand risks and potentials. For example, if all right, this is the potential of a car accident or an accident at work, of lost time, and what those variables are, you'll be able to better determine for your project what you need to do. It's like, well, okay, I know that the likelihood of these kind of disasters are this amount, the likelihood of a human error or human injury is this, and then you can start using that data to better fundamentally project where the project's going to be. Because once you have an understanding of, if you have a large project, you're going to have to assume, okay, some people, there's potential for injury, potential for turnover. You're going to have a better understanding of what kind of replacements will need to happen and what time impact that will have on the project.
Yeah, we're all familiar with how terrible the project success rates are in the industry, software projects. That is, how much of the percentage of these projects fail or go over budget or go over schedule. Are you optimistic? Are you sort of utopian in the sense that these tools and these technologies are going to help us better estimate these projects up front? Is that something that you see being a side effect of all this technology? And is that going to have an impact on the industry in some way?
Well, it's going to have an impact on the industry, and I don't think it's ever going to be perfect. And as long as it's an imperfect reality, there will always be a need for project managers. If it does ever get to a point where it's a perfect correlation of these things, AI will certainly then be able to do the job. But I think that there are just too many potential variables. Now, you can deal with likelihoods and say, okay, well, this is more likely and this is less likely. And if these events occur, it's more likely to cause a delay than not. But that doesn't necessarily mean the reality of the circumstance, because you'll be looking at data based upon a large set of information. You may have a great team that you worked with for years, and they can easily surpass what's expected of the bell curve. So I see that it is this imperfectness about project management that's going to require people for the foreseeable future. Now, that doesn't mean they can't make better decisions using data and AI, but I don't think that it's going to get to that perfect level anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Let's shift gears a little bit. What, in terms of the projects that people are currently working on, project managers, what are some of the most common AI initiatives and AI projects that project managers are working on these days within corporate environments? What would you have any insight into that?
When it comes to AI projects, I see there are different ones. I know people are very curious about how it's impacting the workplace, and that was part of the reason why I was part of this study at the academic level, to understand, well, where is the field of teaching going? And so the same thing's going to happen in other industries. For example, we talked about the insurance industry. I think they're going to be moving toward a lot of AI and crunching large data. I know that different companies out there, for example, IBM is trying to tout their AI in the area of supply chain. after the whole pandemic toilet paper fiasco we had in this country, people are starting to wonder, it's like, well, is there a better way, or could have this been foreseen, or how can we better project these shortages, or things like that. And any retail company that's large is going to have a vested interest in trying to figure that out and try to utilize that as much as possible. Um, so I think those are the kind of projects you might be seeing in the industry that project managers might be heading up.
Well, I mean, if somebody wants to gain experience, they're eager to basically learn on the job and get experience on these types of projects. Do you have any particular suggestions for how they can go about it? There's, I'm sure you're familiar with this concept. It's called the corporate immune system, which basically means that, companies are basically immune to change. They don't like change. There's usually a core competency. And there's a lot of very powerful people who've been around a long time who have a vested interest in keeping things going the way they're going. They usually have their eyes on retirement, and they're averse to taking risks. And so it can be hard sometimes to get real world experience in cutting edge technologies when you're in environments like this. And a lot of our project managers out there are in environments like this. They work for very large companies that are not particularly nimble or entrepreneurial. How do you suggest that people go about getting real world experience on these projects, in particular when they're in these types of sluggish environments?
Okay, well, when you're in a large company and you're expected to be much more specialized, it is challenging. At that point, I would recommend that there are organizations like PMI where you can go and volunteer on different projects, or sit on different committees or interact. Another way is networking and understanding. Of course, I think that education is often forgotten, and I don't necessarily always mean like getting another degree. I feel that there's a lot of certificates out there, as well as a lot of training that's just out there in general that will help an individual. Because now you're going to be in a classroom with like-minded individuals. You can network with them. You can learn a new skill. It will show well on your CV or your resume, and so now you're gaining these skills that you might not have gotten elsewhere. At PMI, if you were to volunteer on different projects, you'll now be, again, interacting with other project managers. You'll be dealing with things that can help you grow, and in some cases they could be cutting edge. Now, I've also found, sometimes if a person is truly interested in that, I would really recommend that they find a smaller company to look at, because the moment you're in a smaller company as a project manager, you will be forced to wear multiple hats, and you will forced to learn multiple skills. The good and the bad, a large company, of course, there's a lot more security, but the downside is they will tend to want you to become a subject matter expert of something very narrow.
Yeah, that's a good insight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good insight. So, I mean, what's the future going to look like in 10 years? I mean, 10 years is an eternity in technology. Are you still optimistic that after 10 years of exponential, accelerating change in AI and in automation, where AI is going to be embedded everywhere, where it's going to be dial tone perfect and seamlessly integrated, and the world will continue its inexorable march towards globalization and total interconnectedness. What's the role of the PM going to look like, and what sort of skills do they have that you would say are immune even over a 10-year time period, that are always going to be immune? And where are the areas that they should be focusing on? What I'm afraid of when I tell people, when I talk to people, is you don't want to become redundant with the technology. If there is technology that can do your job better and faster than you can, then you need to pivot and develop other competency areas that are going to make you complementary with the technology, so that you don't become redundant. So in 10 years or so, if AI and automation continues its inexorable march, what will the role of the PM look like, and what will be their most marketable skills?
Okay, I see their most marketable skills are going to be when it is interacting with people, communication, and just technology. You talked about what can they do to become more immune. And the reality there is it's education and training. You don't want to become, like you said, technology making you redundant. Now, I'll give you the example that I've had it just in my lifetime. Okay, when I started working in business, there was a thing called a general ledger, and it was this big book, and people would write down credits and debits and that was pretty much how accounting was done. And so accountants needed to understand how to process this information, how to do a two-sided entry, and they did it on pen and paper, and they did it in a book, and that's how companies maintained the ledgers of their accounts. Well, now we fast forward to today. Well, there's no pen and paper. There are advanced systems and programs. And trust me, there are more accountants now than there were back then, even though they were using pen and paper. There are more systems that are supporting them. And what has happened is the systems have become so sophisticated is that they no longer need to understand the concept of debits and credits. And so I have been on projects where I'm meeting with accounting talking about these things, and half the people don't know what I'm talking about. They just say, well, I put the entry here and this is the data I put in. And that's what they do. And the back end of the system is actually doing all that thinking. So in that regard, I've seen this huge change where accountants existed, 30 years ago, accountants exist today. The technology has changed to a point where they don't necessarily need to understand even the basics of accounting in order to interact with the system. Having said all that, like I said, there are more accountants now than there were before. I see the same thing happening with project managers. There will still be more because there'll be more of a need. And there'll also be more of a need for the ones that can think independently and have the education and training to do these more advanced projects.
Well, when you say education and training, I mean, the challenge here from a practical perspective these days is that things are moving so quickly and technology changes so quickly that if you put a plan in place to develop a level of expertise in something, that by the time you've mastered it, it's either become obsolete or it's a level of knowledge that has become black boxed in some way, where it is like, as you said, I don't need to understand it. I just put the information in here and I put the information in here and I get what I want. And that's a risk. We only have so much time. So how do you deal with this as somebody who's a practical person, who's got a family, who's got a limited amount of time, they've got job responsibilities, they're trying to be a continuous learner. They don't entirely know what the future is going to look like and what they need to know. So how do we, when you say education and training is important, what's a good strategy for, because we don't want to become too specialized because that's very risky. We also don't entirely know what the future technologies are going to look like in 5 years. So how would you advise people to stay continuous learners in a way that is effective?
Okay. Well, what I have done is I've always diversified my skill set and I've followed the trends. For example, if you follow what the PMBOK has been changing to and pivoting to over the years, years ago, the PMBOK barely spoke about risk management. Now the PMBOK talks a lot about risk management. Before there was nothing about complexity. Now we talk about complexity in projects. Before the pandemic, project managers would talk about virtual projects, but very few actually were happening. Now everything seems to be possible to be virtual. It was interesting to me because one of the books I had written about complexity theory and about virtual teams, and that was written now it's 20 years back. At the time, it was considered this, it's not really a cut. It's not really a thing that will happen. It's one of these niche markets. I remember because the book I published with my co-author was put in the niche section of project management because it was like, this is a little, virtual projects are maybe only, 5% of the market, it's never going to go more than that. So, not so many people are interested. Now, I talk about that material and the stuff that we researched, and the things that we did, some of the things came to pass like immediately once the pandemic happened. And now everyone is dealing with technology that had to support that. If you look at some of the technology like we're using right now is Zoom. Zoom was kind of like something that wasn't so exciting and people kind of used it sometimes. And now it become this juggernaut. Same thing, Microsoft Teams. What Microsoft Teams was before the pandemic wasn't particularly user friendly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You said that you've always made a point of diversifying your
Yeah.
skills. What exactly did that look like for you?
Okay. From me,
For
what
you
I did was
personally. For you.
absolutely. I went and I sought out education that was project management related and what I consider project management adjacent. And I remember having this discussion with my colleague, and I had told her, okay, I'm starting now to work in cybersecurity, and I'm doing research and educating myself when it comes to doing. I got involved with a project where I was helping out a couple companies to complete their cybersecurity manuals and how to comply with government legislation on that. And as I was going through that, they had gotten me in because I had an understanding of the industry they were in, and I was a project manager. But I did not know computers to the degree that I needed to know. As I started going through it, for example, two of the big areas that cybersecurity and what the government was looking for, one was business continuity, which is something that most project managers are already doing. They have some kind of business continuity plan. And the other one they're dealing with is kind of like risk and emergency planning. And those are some of the elements. Now, of course, now you're dealing with the ramifications of a security incident or a cyber incursion, and now you're having to continue the business in that regard. But I'm going, I already know I already know risk. I already know business continuity and made those plans, and I know these skills. I just need to get more knowledge on what exactly is needed, on the technology side.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good. I have a good narrative. I have a friend of mine like yourself who recently said in one of these interviews that cybersecurity itself is just a good puzzle piece that no matter what you're doing, even if whether you're a project manager or not, whatever career you're in, if you were able to develop a sort of a generalist knowledge about cybersecurity and just add it to your bag of tricks, that right there is just a winning move, right there.
Yeah.
Because, as we move into one, there's so much uncertainty about what the future is going to look like right now. McKinsey has these reports coming out where they don't know what, 40% of the jobs are going to be in 3 years. That's how do we prepare for a world that we can't envision? But we do know that everything is moving towards total interconnectedness. And one of the problems with total interconnectedness is that there's an enormous increase in risk. Because everything is interconnected. Okay. And so that seems to be a really safe bet. Like getting knowledgeable about cybersecurity and adding that to your bag of tricks is sort of a winning move. And I think probably also becoming developing a general familiarity, not necessarily a specialized familiarity, but a general familiarity with all of the trends that are out there. Because again, there's a risk in becoming specialized because things will change by the time you develop a level of expertise. And you need to be able to develop a kind of a mental model of what the world might look like and the projects that you might be on. There's things in nanotechnology, Internet of Things, Internet of Bodies, new computing paradigms like quantum computing. There's obviously all the revolution, augmented reality and virtual reality and autonomous vehicles and. They now talk about not just 3D printing, but 4D printing. I mean, so there's a lot. And if we can be nimble, about all of these things and understand a general amount, then I think that might serve us well. It's the best hope we've got, I just hope that I like your optimism. I hope that what you're saying is true. There's a lot of project managers out there. I mean, according to the PMI, there's like 50 million people worldwide that are doing project management. They're not all certified. So it's a lot of people. So, I like your attitude. I like your optimism. I hope we can bring you back to give us a little more insight, in 6 months or so. Who knows how quickly the industry will changes. Do you have any final piece of advice for our audience, most of whom are project managers?
Yeah, well, the other piece of advice I kind of want to offer is, in addition to cybersecurity, more recently, like within just the last 6 months, I've been actually doing some training and education in additional quality assurance. I went because, again, quality assurance, you're doing audits, you're examining risk. All these things that project managers already have skills on. And so I actually now hold a couple certifications when it comes to being ISO 9000 and one auditor, as well as being a quality matters auditor on the education side. So I think that another thing as a project manager, because if you're organized and you can follow, like the PMBOK or follow these things, you could, once you know the data you should be looking at and how it should be organized in the process, you can audit that process. And as a project manager, I find that you're going to be a little bit more organized and methodical about making sure that the processes are being followed.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much, Robert. Hope to have you back soon.
Okay, great.
Okay, take care.
All right, thanks.